Well, welcome back to the Dwell Podcast, the podcast dedicated to inspiring and activating church creatives and leaders.
That's right.
Yeah.
You nailed it.
Thank you so much. Nailed it. Man, we have a lot of stuff to talk about today. We're excited about. The topic for today is servant leadership. Actually, before we do that, hi, I'm Nathan.
Yeah.
We should maybe start there.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ryan.
Yeah. Hey guys.
Should we say more than that? I think that's
probably fine.
I think they know us really well
I think they know us by now.
Nathan and Ryan.
Yeah.
No last names required.
Our last podcast, we got pretty vulnerable. So we shared some
did.
pretty crazy stories.
Yeah.
So
if you missed that, jump back, go check that out. I love that. That was a good podcast.
It was really good.
Yeah. Set the bar high. Hopefully we don't suck it up today.
And the thing is last podcast, we talked a little bit about C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia. I think today we might even bring in some Harry Potter. It's going to be great.
Yes. Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about servant. Yeah, there you go. Today we're going to talk about servant leadership. And what does that look like today? What does that look like in our context? What is a servant leader? And all the stuff in between.
Yeah.
So Ryan, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. A few weeks back, I was talking to the interns here at the church, and I knew the subject was servant leadership. And we just know innately as leaders, it's like, okay, if you follow Jesus, servant leadership is a thing, you know?
Right.
So I was going back over some past notes, and I just happened to hit this note out of John 13. And I kept rereading John 13, and I started realizing, like, there are so many things in this passage that show Jesus' heart for servant leadership. And I thought, let's just kind of use that as an anchor for today. We'll hit some stuff. We'll talk about, what servant leadership looks like today, some other things like that. But right off the bat, I want to dive into John 13, and then we could kind of bounce from there. So
let's do it.
John 13, I am in the New Living Translation.
Oh, okay.
Because that was the one that was within arm's reach of me this morning. No theological reason whatsoever. John 13 starts off, before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. He had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. It was time for supper, and the devil had already prompted Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything, and that he had come from God and would return to God. And there's two things as John's setting this up that I think are so important. Number one, I think for servant leaders, and this is one of those sort of intangible things that when you work under somebody like this, you just know whether it's true or not. Yeah. But Jesus loved his disciples. And he loved them to the very end, it said. Even through all their mess, even through all the times that they screwed up, even through Peter's, manic little fits, which he's about to go through another one. He loved the disciples. And I think servant leadership right off the bat starts with the foundation of love toward the people that you are leading. And that's one of those intangible things, but I do think it's very tangible. I think people know whether you love them or not. Whether you're looking at them as just a tool to accomplish something, or you really care about them as a person and seeing them grow in that. And as for servant leaders, it's like we have to constantly keep going back to that. And for me as a leader, it's not an automatic thing.
Right.
I don't automatically show up at the table going, I love my team and I want the best for them. I have to sit down and I have to pay attention to them. I have to meet with them. I have to pay attention to when they're hurting, pay attention to when they're excited. I have to actually keep reminding myself, like, hey, I'm not here to just accomplish something. And maybe it's an Enneagram 3 thing. And maybe other people just default that. But for me, it's like, no, I have to dive into their lives on purpose and show them and myself and God that love is my primary motivator.
No, that's so good.
Yeah.
So the question, what is servant leadership? Right? So we just talked about it a little bit. Jesus sets the example. Yeah. And he does that constantly throughout Scripture. He says, basically act like I'm acting.
Yes.
And And but it's this leadership that is others focused, right? And kind of what we joked about a second ago about the Harry Potter thing.
Yes.
So
please go into that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So when we were talking about this subject earlier off camera, and we were talking about this idea of chess, right? So when God's entrusted a team to us or entrusted individuals to us, we basically, a lot of times as leaders, we view things as kind of a chessboard, right? We're moving people around, we're doing whatever. And the not servant leadership mentality of this is these chess pieces are there to help me win. And what Jesus would essentially say is actually the opposite, is that like we are there to help them win.
Yes.
And where this conversation kind of led us to, of course, where my mind went is wizard's chess, because in Harry Potter, wizard's chess is completely opposite of normal chess. So in normal chess, the person playing is right. The pieces are there to help the player
They're the masterminds.
They're the mastermind all of it.
Moving all the pieces.
But in wizard's chess, the actual pieces, because obviously magic, because Harry Potter, the pieces can actually say no.
Yeah.
So like in reality, it flips the other way around. Like you're there to help those pieces win.
Yes.
Lamest example ever, but I feel like it's so brilliant.
True. Oh yeah.
So
they can say no to you.
they can say no, right,
You're leading
which is way
can
more
say no.
Indicative of real life.
Yeah. But I think Jesus displays this for us so well.
Yeah.
And it's like his primary motivation is love. And I think that is kind of the foundation for servant leadership.
Yeah.
I think servant leadership has a lot of different facets. And one of those too is Jesus in verse 3. I love it. Says, Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything,
Right.
that he had come from God and he would return to God. So Jesus loves his disciples. He's not second guessing his identity or authority or anything. He's showing up going, no, I know exactly what my authority is.
Right.
And you can even see that John's laying this foundation for, like, he's about to wash feet, which we go, oh, that's a nice biblical story,
Right.
For them, this was like embarrassing. This is them like probably looking over their shoulder going, I hope the neighbors don't see this is going on. They're going to think so much less of Jesus if they see him doing this. Like, this is embarrassingly low. And so John's almost giving us like, hey, he knows who he is, you guys. Like, he's doing this on purpose. I know it's about to sound really embarrassing, but Jesus was a leader who knew what he was doing. But he knew with that authority, he was secure in that authority, and he didn't have to fight for it in the room. He didn't have to show up and like be the big personality in the room. He showed up and said, I'm going to use my authority that was God-given, that is greater than any other human that has ever or will ever live.
Yeah.
Jesus carried all that authority, and yet he showed up at the table and said, I'm about to do something that's really low, and I know what I'm doing. And I think leadership, when you're operating out of that insecurity, when you're going, hey, I don't know who I am, and I think maybe I'm trying to be like so-and-so pastor online, on Instagram, or so-and-so worship leader on Instagram, that insecurity of not knowing who you are comes across in a very harsh way, and it really is it messes up the foundation of any servant leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were saying that, it made me think of insecurity comes out really loud,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
When we're secure in who we are as a leader, when we're secure in who God's called us to be, and Jesus ultimately knew who he was supposed to be. He full on owned his lane in every speakable way,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
In every way imaginable. And it's true. I think our insecurity can speak really loud, and our confidence. It's so weird how insecurity can be so loud, but security can be so quiet.
Yes. Yeah.
It's really interesting how that works.
It's true.
And earlier we were joking about Enneagram, because Enneagram is like the thing over the past few years that everyone's really locked into.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we find ourselves in these conversations a lot of leadership focus 2019. Leadership focus now 2021, and how our mindset in a lot of way has changed. But it kind of hasn't. We've kind of always known the right way to lead, but we've kind of allowed ourselves to get caught in the kind of like the downstream of what maybe some more prominent leaders' styles are and stuff like that. And what we talked about was this type of dominating leadership.
Yeah.
And how in 2019, I think for some reason, and what I've found in a lot of conversations with young leaders is that they've either found themselves on teams or they find themselves being drawn toward leaders who are very eights. Right?
Yes. Yeah,
hey, your 8 is showing right now.
Yes.
Like just very dominating type leaders.
Yes. Life of the party. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like showing up, and it's like, lights are shining on them. You know,
Yeah,
like
well,
we all imagine that as leadership.
I think of park your monster truck in the lobby. Just drive right through the front doors and park it. And it doesn't matter kind of who you spend on the way.
That leader's in the room. Bam,
as long as the goal is accomplished and you get the thing done and all this stuff. Yeah. But it's anyways, not to bash on any specific style of leader, but it's easy to make fun of 8s because we're 3s. Because we're not 8s.
We're not 8s.
We're not 8s.
But it's true. It's that like domineering sort of idea of leadership that it's like, it's so pervasive in culture. Yeah. It's so easy for it to leak into the church all over the place and go, I'm not a strong leader unless I'm a strong leader.
Well, and you, a lot of times the misconception is if I'm the loudest in the room, I'm the most dominating in the room, then I know the most, I have the most authority in the space, right? Yeah. And what Jesus constantly draws us back to is this difference between authority and influence. Yeah. And how Jesus constantly knows his authority, is secure in his authority, but chooses to not. Right. Like Scripture straight up says he knowing everything that he's capable of and knowing what he commands, he chose servanthood. Yeah. Right. He chose it
to the point of humiliating death on the cross.
Yeah.
Yes.
To the nth degree. Yes. He owns it. So the question is, and maybe we can chat about this just a little bit. Yeah. In your experience, what would you say the biggest difference is between leading from your authority or leading from your influence?
Yeah. I think when you're leading from authority, you are constantly trying to one-up people in the room. So in authority in the unhealthy sense. Yes. So you're leading out of this place of kind of domineering authority. Right. It's based on insecurity, though it might be loud, though it may seem like it's big and confident. Deep down, there's this foundation of insecurity in how God's made you. And you're constantly trying to manipulate the room, manipulate people, turn them into I get so guilty of this too. Like we're trying to create these great moments. Right. They're awesome. They're beautiful. Yes, as creative leaders, we could create great moments on Sunday morning. This last week, we had Easter. Yeah. We had a Saturday night service. And for me, I felt like, there wasn't this great moment kind of thing, you know? And there's always those checks as a leader. You have to kind of take a step back and go, well, maybe I can control a couple of things. Right. But I was also really tired from Good Friday. There's a lot of other things going on. And I'm like, I can't fully trust myself here. Like maybe I'm not feeling all the emotions, but I don't need to grab a ton of control, you know? So you do what you can. You make calls. We changed a few things going into the next service, but you have to kind of let it go, you know? When you're operating out of that sort of grab a hold of it, white knuckle authority, you are going to be running people over. You're going to be trying to be the loudest and smartest in the room, and really, most people that are operating out of that don't fool anybody. You know, you're trying to lead from fear. You know, like little moments where you're like, maybe I can prove my authority by busting that person down. You know, like all of those things are exhausting for a leader to keep doing. Like you've got to keep your authority up in the room because you got to keep like proving it and hitting people with it. When you're coming out of it, what was the other way that you said it? From influence. Like this place of influence is a little bit different. Yeah. That's where you've earned it in the room. Again, you're coming from this foundation of love. Yeah. You don't have to be the loudest one in the room to have authority. And we were talking about this before. David, who is the lead pastor here at this church, and he is not a dominating sort of leader. Occasionally he is. Occasionally he'll come in. Every leader has their bad days. But for the most part, he comes in like staff meeting. He doesn't need to run staff meeting. He kind of hangs out, you know. And you and I were talking about it. When I first experienced that with David, it was disorienting to me because I was going, hey, man, like take some authority in the room. Like grab a hold of this thing, you know. And David was like, no, why don't you do that? Why don't you run that? You know. And I was going, okay, you know. Yeah. And that security is like, we're not used to that in 2021. We're used to leaders just like grabbing authority, like, you know, making this protective bubble around themselves so that they always feel in charge. And when you experience a leader that's coming off of that, it's both disorienting, but it also allows people underneath them to thrive and to rise up and to step into things that maybe they wouldn't otherwise. You know?
That's good. I think whatever we gain with is whatever we have to maintain. Like you were saying, if we show up and we're that dominating personality, and that's, let's say in your organization or wherever you're at, your ability to step in and to grab your title and to grab your authority and to lead the team, if that's the only way you know how to lead, right? Which isn't what the model Jesus is giving us. That's the only way you know how to lead. You have to maintain that, and you end up burning people out. So the other side of it
or
is
yourself out,
because it's exhausting to live that way. And I think of this idea of if someone came to you, if a leader came to you, and they gave you advice on whatever it was. Let's say they gave you life advice or advice on how to lead your team or whatever. Whether or not you heed that advice says a lot about how you view that leader. So it says a lot about whether or not that leader has authority over you or influence with you, which are two completely different spaces, right? Totally. And how I think as leaders, we so often underestimate our posture. We underestimate our posture and how we approach the people that we're leading. We approach from this, hey, I'm your boss, please do this. Again, we're talking, more dramatic into the spectrum here. But it doesn't create the results that we actually think it creates. So the opposite effect would be someone who has influence with you, right? Not leadership over you or authority over you. You would take that advice. And the reason you would take that advice is because you would trust them, right? Because they either have a good track record, they've spent time like Jesus did, truly loving his disciples and getting to know them and spending time with them. Like you were saying, with the team that you lead, you're constantly spending time with your team. So you're gaining influence with them, right? So it's so interesting how your vantage point in the room completely changes your end result.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I had 8 meetings yesterday because it was like post-Easter, we took a couple of days off, which means we have 2 days to get this Sunday together, So I had 8 meetings yesterday, and just as you were talking about that, I talked about Sunday morning for probably 15 or 20 minutes yesterday. The rest of the time was, how are you doing? What's going on? There were coaching conversations. Hey, in the meeting, you were acting a little bit like this. We need to fix that. And so they're coaching conversations. It's diving into their lives. And
that's good.
And not that I'm perfect at it at all, but it's funny. Like I start to pay attention to my time, especially as I'm moving into a different place of management. And I find most of the time I'm spending is not trying to get Sunday morning off the ground and cast vision for what the service is going to look like. It's a lot more like, how are the people underneath me doing? And for leaders, sometimes that's an intangible. Sometimes it's really hard. For me, it's really hard because I feel a lot better about going, hey, what's Sunday morning look like? Let's look at the set. Does it look a little weird? Does it look it's good? That's safe territory. When you start getting into, how are you feeling? Are you doing okay? How's your, emotional health doing? I had a conversation yesterday about emotional health with somebody going, is it okay? If you're not aware of it, well, then what can we do to help you get aware of it? But that's just what servant leadership looks like, where you're caring about the people more than you're caring about what has to be done. And that is something that I think every leader has to keep in check. We always have to keep that check. Yes, we have things that have to get done, but we have people that we're trying to lead.
So in a very practical way, for people who are listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, let's maybe talk through just a couple of things that you and I do. A couple practices. So one of the things that I try to do, and I encourage other leaders that I'm coaching or mentoring or people or teams that I'm leading, is I say do the text message challenge, which means that you pull out your phone and you look at your texts with your current team and you actually go into each one of those text messages and you check out, do I text my team mostly about the job that they need to get done, the results that I expect them to accomplish, right? Or do I text them to check in on them personally? Do I banter with them? Do I have a relationship with them, right? And
that's good.
It's a small indicator, right? Because sometimes your seasons can just be very busy and you're talking a lot of shop, right? And that's fine. But generally speaking, you could quickly scroll through a text thread with someone and you can tell pretty quickly, oh man, I'm all business all the time. Right? And at that point you go, am I leading from a position of authority or am I building influence and trust with these people, not to get a result, but because I've been stewarded to care for these people.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
So that's one practical thing that
that's
I
really
do.
good. That's really good. I think when it comes to, for me, it's conversation. And it's one of those things too. It's like everybody that talks about servant leadership should feel a twinge of like, oh, I'm not quite there. You know, like
we're all working at it.
That's okay. We're all working at it, you know. But I think like sitting down with people and going, you know, how's your life going? You know, for me, it may not be a text message challenge and it might just because I'm pushing 40 and I do a little bit less stuff over text. But I like having an open office where people could pop down and we could just talk about whatever.
That's good.
And for me, I think like there's a couple people on the team right now that I know, and this is a good barometer. Like they carry a position on the team. Absolutely. Yeah. They have a job description. They have things that they have to do for the team.
Right.
But there's a few of them that I'm going, but I see a different you than just this job description. Do you see your team just as this static player right now? Or do you see them as like, hey, the potential for you moving forward could be this, you know? Leaders get scared of that. And I get it, because sometimes it might put you on the line for like, what if that person doesn't move into that position? Or what if that person doesn't move into that area? But it's part of the risk as a leader I think we need to be taking.
Yep.
We have to look at the people not just statically, like where are they at now, but where are they going to be 5 years from now?
Right.
And if you're leading from that point of view, if you're going, hey, this is what our team's going to look like in 5 years, that is an important thing for me. I have to be able to look at somebody and go, right now, this is your job on the team. But I see one day you might start your own church. You might there's this different version of you that when you care about your team member, when you're praying for the people on your team, the Lord starts to give you some sort of vision for what they could be doing. That sort of prophetic like calling out of people is so important.
Right.
And that's Jesus, like out of his security, he knew that he was going back to the Father. So Jesus, knowing his flesh and blood leadership had a finite amount of time, he was looking at these disciples going, you guys are a hot mess, but in a few days, you are going to hold the keys to the castle and you're going to be everything to put forward this crazy kingdom that's going to change the world.
Yes.
He knew he was temporary in that sense.
Right.
Yes, the Holy Spirit was coming. Yes, the Helper was coming.
Right.
But he knew his flesh and blood influence over them had a finite amount of time. How many times do we as a leader like really know, like, hey, my time might be short here. Like, hey, I might not be permanent here. That sort of humility always checks us and goes, hey, this doesn't rely on me. So when you look at your team, you got to see them far beyond just where they're at right now.
Yes.
You got to say, like, where are they going to be at in a few years? If I dip out of here, if I get called somewhere else, I get hit by a bus or whatever, can they step in and take my place? You know, like that is a place of security that for me, I'm constantly trying to make sure my mindset's there.
No, that's good. One of the things that you and I have talked about a lot and camped around this idea is that style draws people, but culture keeps them.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about creating an atmosphere, creating a family with a creative team.
Yeah.
And I would say that this is probably the biggest question I get more often than not is people ask about team nights, right? So, because I'm with Hillsong and you know, we've been doing team nights here at Living Streams. And so people ask, like, how do we get team nights? Like, what's the purpose of team night? Explain team night. And I think the way that we've kind of, the center that we've kind of come to is creating a space, creating an environment for team to belong before they do anything. Yeah. Right? That's real simple way of saying that. But it's a space of belonging and helping people feel like we're there to serve them. They're not there to serve us, right? Which is this whole servant leadership. When we host team nights, we'll say, just show up. You know, if you go through a creative one-on-one class to get plugged into team, great. But if you don't, and you just want to come to team night for the next 6 months and just sit there and just be a part of creative team, welcome. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah.
You belong before you do anything.
Yeah, you belong before you do anything.
You've changed our team, I think, with that dynamic. And it's something I think like we all were going, yeah, we get that, you know. But then you bring it in such a simple way. And that is, it's like these, so many times we want to boil servant leadership into like, make sure you do A, B, and C. Right. And, you know, and sub point B is something, you know.
Yes.
But there's this mindset, again, that Jesus came from, that he loved his disciples. Mm-hmm. And what you're saying, even with team night, it's like, it's people first before they do any work for us.
Right.
You belong to our team first.
Yes.
Secondarily, then we're going to find out where you can help the team out.
Right.
And even for you, you're like, build even more positions, create more positions for people to join, because it's a people-first mentality, not a job-first mentality, which is huge.
It is huge. I mean, we're creating a family. We're not creating a country club.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there isn't this buy-in, right? So if we were creating a country club mentality team for creative ministry or leadership at church, it would be show up, right? So that's your signing in. Mm-hmm. And then you would pay your fee, which paying your fee would be serving however many weekends, committing to this, doing all that stuff, which again, serving in church is crucial. It's awesome. Yeah. We grow when we serve. Yes. So we should ask we should lead our teams to serve at church. Yeah, it's good for the church. It's good for us. I was reading the scripture this morning in 1 Peter 4:10. It says, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. God's grace is outlived in our giftings, right? So I'm not saying don't ask people to serve. Yeah. But what I'm saying is, if we had a country club mentality, we use serving as currency to belong. Yeah. And that shouldn't be the way we lead creative teams. Yeah, it shouldn't be the way we lead teams in general. Yeah, right? People should be able to, it's one of the things that we say at Hillsong all the time is you don't have to believe to belong. Yeah. Right? So people will come to church on a weekend and we're just like, hey, if you're just kicking the tires and checking it out, welcome. Yeah. Like, you're okay to be here. Yeah. You know? Yeah, totally. No one's going to chase you out of here. Yeah, yeah. But if we lead creative teams from this family mentality, we create a safe space for people to belong before they do anything for us. Yes. Yeah. We're not doing the whole like bait and switch, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. One curveball I think I would throw at our perceived idea of servant leadership. I think, again, coming back to John 13 as this sort of like orienting passage for us. Servant leadership is not leading out of consensus either. So there's this weird subtle thing where it's like...
explain that.
Yeah. So as a servant leader, you're supposed to take charge into something in a different way than the world shows. So Jesus, again, he's taking charge. He's doing something very creative right here in John 13 when he's washing the disciples' feet. Right. He said, what is the most lowly thing, the most embarrassing thing I can do for these disciples? And he knew his culture. Yeah. He was thinking outside of the box. He was being very creative with this idea. And he said, how about I wash their feet? You know, and you got to imagine he
wasn't detached from current culture. He knew that was awkward.
He knew it was awkward. And it's so hard for us. Like, we don't live in a real high honor culture in a lot of ways. So it's hard for us to wrap our head around this. Right. But there are certain cultures. When Blake and I were in Cambodia, it was a really high honor culture. So if there's an older man in the room and I was sitting down and I had to leave the room to go to the bathroom or something, if I just stood straight up, everybody would look at me and be like, wow, what a jerk. You know, like I had to, even though I couldn't keep my head lower than the man sitting down, I had to at least show that I was ducking my head when I went out as a sign of reverence for the older person in the room. Wow. If they're sitting on a couch or something, you were supposed to try to keep your head lower than theirs as you walk out. Otherwise, it's offensive. And again, this is one of those things that it's like, this is not just Jesus is washing my feet. I mean, in today's culture, washing someone's feet is weird. Like, yeah, it's weird. It's weird.
It's always been weird.
It's always been weird. So it was weird then, but it was like degrading at that point, you know. So Jesus comes up with this idea at some point, you know, maybe it's just in the moment, but he's like, hey, I'm going to do something for you. And Peter goes, like, what are you doing? And it says, Lord, what? You are not going to wash my feet. Like, Peter's going, you're not going to do this. Like, I'm going to save you from yourself, Jesus. Like, You're doing something really embarrassing. And Jesus said, you don't understand what I'm doing, but someday you will. Wow. Jesus had confidence to dive into something, and there was no consensus in this room that this was a good idea. Right. None of the people he was leading were like, hey, Jesus, this is a great idea. You know, they were all embarrassed by it, and they were probably just waiting for it to go by. And Jesus is going, no, I'm doing this on purpose so that you'll gain something from me. And I think as leaders, a lot of times we think that humility means that we're leading from consensus, so that we're just gathering everybody's ideas and trying to do everybody's ideas. Sometimes serving people is coming to the table with an idea that may not be popular, but it's grounded in this idea of love.
That's so good.
So you and I were talking about this. So Outcry was one of these places where I would experiment on all of my heroes. Like, it was just really weird. So I would
say it that way.
yeah, we would show up in a room and we'd go, we need to do this sort of like small group thing. And Carrie would be there, like Hillsong's team, everybody would be there and they'd be looking at me like, what are we doing here, And one of the nights I remember the Helsers were leading, and I felt real strong from the Lord, like, hey, we need to dive into some prophetic ministry tonight. So I was going to challenge everybody, and of course the Helsers, they're like, yeah, great, we're into it. So they led worship for a little while. They threw the floor over to me, and I said, hey guys, I want you to just take a minute to pray, and if the Lord highlights anyone in this room, it doesn't matter if they are super famous or they're just a stagehand, whatever it is, pray for the Lord to give you an insight, and then go to that person and share that word. And there was a team in the room, and I won't say who they are, but they're a super cool team, not very prophetic, and they were sitting in the corner and they were looking at each other like, this is really awkward,
Funny.
And there was just something in me that was like, that's okay. Did it hurt and was it embarrassing for me? It was. Because I was going, I really look up to that team.
Oh no, they don't think I'm cool anymore.
But there was a sacrifice in it because I was going, I love these people, and there might be 5 or 6 prophetic words that are shared tonight that might change people's lives. No, that's okay. I'll put a few of them through something awkward. And then fast forward to the end of, I think it was the end of that tour, or maybe it was a tour, I can't keep them straight. But Dave Ware from Hillsong, he shared a prophetic word with me. And I'll never forget it because it was not eloquently put, but it was exactly right. And he kind of finished this at the end of the tour. We were on the very last day. We were in LA, so we had all the cool LA people there, all the record labels were hanging out. And he shared this prophetic word with me, and he said, I think Ryan is really strong in this with Outcry because he doesn't know what he's doing. and he said that, and people laughed and looked at me like, are you offended? And I was like, oh, I get it right away. Yeah. And he said, Ryan doesn't know that there are rules to these backstage times. He doesn't know that there's record labels trying to protect artists from getting embarrassed, or he just goes, hey, we're all going to get together and we're going to pray for each other, and who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And when he said that, I thought, yeah, that's true.
Yes.
And the thing I want to say though is that was not easy for me. It was a sacrifice. It was a place of humility to say, I'm going to step out and lead. And sometimes leading a room when there's no consensus is actually a loving thing to do. Right. Now, I'm not saying you bulldoze people. I'm not saying that, again, if the foundation isn't love and if you're looking at it as a giant chessboard, it's not gonna translate. But every now and then as a leader, you got to go, you guys, I'm hearing this from the Lord.
Right.
And maybe none of you are with me, but trust me, by the end of this, you're going to get it.
But this is going to make all of us better.
But this is going to make all of us better. And there is a sacrifice in leadership sometimes with that that is so important for leaders to understand. Hey, especially for those reluctant leaders, the leaders that are like, man, I don't even know if I want to take authority in this room.
Yeah.
Sometimes that is an act of serving the people under you.
Wow.
So
that's awesome. We've covered a lot of miles in a very short amount of time.
How long have we been going, Dalton? Are we too long? 35 minutes. Okay, there's a guy named Dalton behind the camera who's awesome.
Hey, Dalton.
He's amazing.
We love you, buddy.
We love you, Dalton. But yeah, honestly,
servant leadership.
Servant leadership. I could talk for another hour about it, but it's
and we were sharing stories that we can't share.
Yes,
on this.
Yes,
and
but yeah, it's so important. But I think for any of you that are out there, it's you have to check where your foundation is.
Right.
You have to really dive into the words of Jesus, the life of Jesus. He really is the more you dive into this book, the more you hear the stories of Jesus, the more you get this sort of intangible download from the Holy Spirit of this is how you lead. And it's a constant check. This is not servant leadership isn't one of those things where you check mark, I arrived at it. It is something you always have to work at because Jesus was the one that showed us that sort of perfect model of servant leadership. But valuing it is the number one thing. And if you love the people under you, you value servant leadership, you want to grow in that, that is kicking you off on a really strong foundation for becoming a servant leader.
Well, and I think maybe to wrap up, we'll just say it this way. So Pastor Judith Christ, who's the lead pastor over at Hillsong Phoenix, one of the lead pastors over with Terry Christ, she always used to say this with our team. She still says this, but she always says, get really good at being loved by God. So if you want to know how to be a servant leader, just get really good at being loved by God.
Yes.
So spending time in his word, spending time in prayer, and just spending time in his presence, right? Spend time praying for your team, interceding for your team, asking for words for your team, encouraging your team, all those things. But the best way to calibrate our spirit, right? Whenever I think of calibrate, I always think about how cell phones years ago, you used to have to do the figure 8 to calibrate the compass in your maps. Do you remember that?
Oh, man.
Do you remember that? Everyone born in 2000 on probably never experienced that. But you used to have to do that. You had to do a figure 8 with your phone to calibrate But the best way to calibrate our spirit, what a weird example, is to just get good at being loved by God. Right? So just spend time with the servant of all servants, Jesus, and just let that rub off on you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Thank you guys so much for joining us on the podcast today. Make sure to jump on Instagram, Dwell Worship. We're really cool. We dropped all the vowels in worship, so it's WRSHP. Jump on YouTube. We got that there. Make sure you subscribe and share, because that's one of the things that really helps us get the word out about this podcast. So if this is content that is a blessing to you, please share. We would love that sort of support. So all of you guys out there, thank you so much for joining us. Until next week, we'll see you later.
Bye, guys.